WWT presents Briefings.
Well, thank you everybody for joining. I'm super excited to show off some of the things that my team has been developing over the last 3 months. And we are here today to talk about what our team is doing to revolutionize engineering. And we're going to talk about a framework for generative AI development that we've been working on. So today we are going to be talking about ChatGPT and large language models in general. We're going to do a high-level overview because we had another builders call about 2 months ago where our team, not my team, but our BAA team dug really deep into ChatGPT and large language models. So I encourage all of you to check out that presentation. But we won't go in depth today. We are going to go in depth into risk overview and some mitigation of those risks. I'm going to talk about our AI research team within software and automation engineering. Some of you may remember us as application services. We are going to go through a couple of demos today. We're going to briefly discuss what we are looking forward to in the future. And we'll try and leave some time for Q&A at the end. So a little bit about myself. I joined WWT in 2013, back then as a part of Asynchrony. I am based in the St. Louis metro area, but I do live on the Illinois side for any of you who are with me on that. I worked in software engineering for 7 years before making the transition into management. As a part of being a software engineering manager, my pride and joy is running our apprenticeship program that I did for the past 3 years, where we were able to bring in over 20 people from early career and diverse backgrounds into our program. Fun fact about me is the last time WWT paid me to write code is when I worked on the St. Jude mobile application that you'll see advertised around in case studies. And if you recognize the really cool purple swoosh that happens on the screen, just know that that was developed in the passenger seat of my van. All right, ChatGPT, overview of large language models. So if you have not heard of ChatGPT before, maybe you were just going by the conference hall today and decided to step on in, ChatGPT is an instance of generative AI. The GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. Now, in general, GPTs are a type of large language model. This is a somewhat important differentiation because some of the large language models that we'll show today are not necessarily generative pre-trained transformers. So they're different parts of the same family, if you will. And if you're asking yourself, what's the business use case? Why are we even talking about ChatGPT? Well, I thought, why not just let it answer that question? So if you haven't seen ChatGPT's interface before, this is just a quick snapshot. And I said, what are 10 use cases of generative AI for a technology company? And this is what it thinks it's good at. Generally, I would agree. Now, the real reason that we are here today, the real reason that I wanted to get everybody on this call is because generative AI has revolutionized engineering. Whether you agree with that statement, whether you realize this, it has. And it's not going to stop. Generative AI is going to continue to rapidly grow over the next few years as we figure out various applications of this technology, as it gets better over time, because the more we use it, the more it gets better. And if you hear one thing from my entire presentation today, I want you to walk away understanding that WWT has the opportunity today to be an early adopter in AI-enabled engineering. If we adopt this technology early, if we figure out how to safely use it, which we're going to talk about today, and we enable our engineering workforce with it, we can be a major player in the generative AI space. This isn't going to be easy, though. It requires thought leadership on our part. It is going to require a lot of innovation, some investment, and it is going to require rigor to move forward, specifically around risks and understanding what we are getting into and having an in-depth knowledge of these risks and what using generative AI could introduce to our company. That's what we're going to talk about today. Specifically, we're going to cover security, how that impacts our business. We're going to give a little bit of an overview of some of the other risks as well. But the reason that I want to start with security is because I view it as the first hurdle for worldwide technology to get into the generative AI space. If we don't figure out security, we don't understand what we're getting into, we expose ourselves unreasonably to legal scenarios and also exposing our clients. So today we're going to dive into security. And specifically, we're going to talk about intellectual property, how we protect our customers' intellectual property, how we protect our own intellectual property. And we're going to cover something that I call creative flaws. Creative flaws, to me, you've probably heard of hallucinations before with generative AI. If you haven't already, we'll cover them today. But creative flaws also encompasses things like completely valid code, things that work, but that are objectively bad. Security flaws that are being introduced, code that's not optimized, things like that, that we're going to cover a little bit of that too. So first, let's talk about intellectual property, and I want to start with a scenario, right? So in this scenario, I am a software engineer. I've been tasked with fixing a bug in this set of code. And so I decide, well, how about I use generative AI? Currently, ChatGPT is a great solution for helping solve these types of problems. So I take this code and I upload it into ChatGPT. It does exactly what I want, finds the bug for me. 5 minutes later, story's done, everything's fine. But I want to call out this line here. When we're talking about intellectual property, and I'll make it a little bit bigger for you, this line is important because if you take this code and you put it directly into public generative AI tools like ChatGPT, you have just exposed our customer or our company in two separate ways. You've revealed that we have a client called Acme in this context, and you also revealed, if you're familiar with SQL, that there is a table called required margin. That would be an interesting thing for Acme code to know, that we have types of required margins on things. And I'm not saying WWT does necessarily, but if we were to do this, we would expose our own intellectual property. It's just code, right? We all have to think a layer deeper in order to protect ourselves. Here's another scenario, and I'm not going to run through this entire prompt, but feel free to read it, where I am a sales individual, or maybe I'm a product owner for a team. We want to pitch a brand new feature to our client, and that brand new feature is around how they decide to rank their own products. So I take this prompt, once again, currently ChatGPT is a great tool to be using, and so I put this into ChatGPT. It gives me the presentation that I'm looking for, which is great, saved me a whole bunch of time. But once again, you're going to notice company names, and in this context, I actually put something into ChatGPT that is intellectual property of our client. I don't own that information. That is a privilege that our client gave me. And if I use public tools like ChatGPT to help me out in this way, I am exposing their information. I cannot stress enough how important these nuanced ways of using generative AI are. Now, if you're interested and you've never done the business value before, I did put that prompt into ChatGPT. I know the text is small, but you'll see that it gave me 3 separate slides on how to go about my presentation. It even gave me a nice little warning about including visuals. You always want visuals in your presentations. All right, let's talk about creative flaws. So I'm going to go back to that same piece of code that we talked about earlier. And in this context, like I said, creative flaws can be in the form of perfectly valid code, but code that is objectively bad. And in this context, you'll see that if I was to actually run that query that we had built before, that this is a SQL injection bug. I didn't do anything to the user input. I just put it directly into SQL. And this could expose us in ways that would be very unsafe for our company. And to be frank, it would be embarrassing if we did this. We've all probably made the mistake, but hopefully we're not doing it frequently. This code was generated by ChatGPT. We have to be careful about these types of scenarios. We have to understand the code that it's giving us, how we use it, and make sure that there are not bugs like this. Now, the other side of this is hallucinations. I tried to come up with a really good but safe way of showing off hallucinations within ChatGPT. And in the process of coming up with that, I found this story, which happened just last week. A lawyer used ChatGPT to generate their legal brief, only to find out after submitting the legal brief that every single case that was referenced in that brief was completely made up. ChatGPT did a great job of creating reasonably sounding things, but also completely false. And you can see these snapshot of articles is just a small amount of the ones that have been written about this particular case. And you can imagine how embarrassing it would be and how damaging it would be for WWT if we ended up in Google like this. And there are other risks with generative AI that we are not going to cover today. Very important risks. We just don't have the time to dive into them. A lot of these risks, though, come around the ethical implications of ChatGPT, or responsible AI, as you will soon hear our organization start talking about a lot more. If you're familiar with the space, you're going to hear about that quite frequently. But understanding things like having transparency around how our models were trained, understanding what data they were trained on, what biases might be in that data, because it's trained on the internet over the past 30 years. We all know that as a society, we've gotten better, but if you train it with historical context, it's going to have a lot of bias. And that can expose us in legal ways that we may not even fully understand today. Other things that we're figuring out around copyright, things like that, are real risks that we need to understand. All right. So we talked about the risks of generative AI. We have talked about some of the benefits of generative AI, and I think a lot of people found themselves over the past 4 or 5 months just asking, how do we start? What do we do from here? And so I've got a quote from my manager, Nick Bimpasis, that there's nothing like a bad start to get things started, which is exactly what we did. So, introducing the software and automation engineering AI research team. About 3 months ago, Nick came to me and said, let's start figuring this out. So I got a team of individuals together, and that team has morphed over time, but we started with that idea. Let's figure it out. We don't know what we don't know yet, so let's dive in. And in figuring out a better way of talking with each other about figuring this stuff out, we came up with this goal: to enable our workforce to leverage generative AI to produce more value for our clients. And I've highlighted more value here for a very specific reason. When people talk about generative AI, they typically talk about production faster, producing things faster. You can code faster, you can create presentations faster. And that is very true. It is also very short-sighted. Generative AI can do a lot more for us as an organization. It can get us into new work streams that we never thought of before, maybe never even tried to compete in before. It will foster creativity amongst our workforce, not only for engineers, but for all individuals that we can unlock this technology for. And as you're going to see a little bit later on, we can build innovations on top of this generative AI technology. Now, as my team was working through this goal and as we started to build some of these innovations, we very quickly realized that we needed a way to communicate with each other, that we needed common words that meant something, that we could check ourselves and make sure that we were going about generating this technology in a safe and secure way. Which brings us to our AI development framework, and I'm going to go into each one of these steps briefly. Security, we already talked about it today, but it's step number one because we have to have a firm understanding of intellectual property risks. We have to train our engineers to handle these creative flaws. And something that our team really honed in on is ownership of the data. Who can see what prompts went into this technology? What happens if we prompt it with something that we didn't mean to prompt it with? Hey, Sachin. We have to understand this, and the technologies that we are building have to be, we have to be in control of this data. Responsibility, I talked about responsible AI. It is a much bigger topic than we have any amount to get into here today. But the thing that I want to make sure we are doing is that we are protecting the trust that WWT has built in the industry. We have world-class engineering, and we can't afford to lose it. And we are going to show our thought leadership in this space, which is going to help us continue to maintain that world-class engineering. The third step in here is accountability. Having good intentions around these first two steps is great, but we have to have a backbone to hold ourselves accountable to the things that we said we were going to do. One area of that is auditable solutions, being able to audit who asked what prompts, what did they do with that data, and just being able to track it. That helps us to be prepared for unknown legal ground ahead. And this last one is my favorite: rigorous experimentation. This industry moves fast. Take it from me, the amount of articles that get submitted and sent over my way to look at, there are many days where it just ends up being a sticky note on my desk because there are too many articles. There's too much innovation, and we have to continuously innovate to keep up with the industry, or we will be left behind. In order to do that, though, we need to create a culture of safe exploration, and there is safety in rigorously following this framework. So, as you'll see today, the things that my team is about to demo, we developed with all of these steps and principles in mind. And I believe we are setting ourselves up for a great future in the generative AI-enabled space. Now for the fun part. David's going to go ahead and get set up over there. for our first demo, but we are going to show off two separate technologies that my team has been working on. These technologies that you're going to see today are proof of concepts. So it's awesome, but just know that we still have some work to do. But they show what we can do in just a few short months, leveraging this technology and what we can build on top of. Are we good?
Yep.
Awesome. Take it away, David.
Sure. Hi, I'm David Lowe. I joined WWT in 2015. I'm based in the St. Louis metro area. I've moved all around, so I've been multiple places in the St. Louis metro area. So I started testing in 2003 on a little game known as Bejeweled, which is a woefully outdated reference now, but at the time it was a massive influence. I wasn't paid. I was a volunteer tester, but my name was in the credits, and I was paid in a lot of swag. And fun fact, since COVID, I have been changing my virtual background every day to celebrate different national holidays. You might all know it's National Donut Day, but I like the stranger ones. Today is also National Yell Fudge at Cobras Day. So if you see any cobras, yell fudge at them. So, moving over here, I have prompts to quickly copy and paste. You don't want to watch me type all these out, especially some of these are very long. But I want to show you what our page looks like here. So if you notice up at the top, we got a model. We have a couple different models to choose from. I'm going to focus on ChatGPT right now. The other ones are completion-based models, and Kevin, when he comes up, will go through those. We have a couple response styles. Once again, it's chat and completion. I'm focusing on chat up here, but letting you know you can change these on our thing. And we have some advanced options. If you know what you're doing, you can come in here and change temperature, top P, max tokens, and all that. I'm just going to come in here as is, show you what our default looks like. And if you've seen ChatGPT in action, this is going to look a lot similar, I believe. So I'm just going to start with generating code. So let's generate some Python and Flask. So if you watch, it's streaming in. It decided to use an SQLite database. I never asked for that. Did I want that? No. But my prompt didn't specify anything. So it just decided to do what it wanted. Looking through this, there's username, email, password. We would definitely want to make sure those are secure and kept as secrets and not put in there. But this is a good outline. This is a good thing to follow, like, oh yeah, I can do this. I can edit this to be what I need. And it took less than 30 seconds. It also comes down here and gives an explanation for the code. So if I really had no clue what Flask was doing, I came down here and go, okay, this is why we're using these things. And all that was made with system messages to tell the AI what is. They're on the background, completely there. So we got a copy button, because who doesn't love copying and pasting from AI into stuff? But just to show it works, because I'm a QA, there we go. So that's great, but we like unit tests. We like our code tested. So can it write some unit tests for that code? I specify PyTest, and here we go. Now, once again, you would want to look at this code, make sure it's reasonable, make sure it's secure, make sure it's making sense. But we got unit tests and an outline of them. And I'm doing this all live in a non-deterministic system, so all this, what's spitting back to me is different than what it spat back to me yesterday, which is different than what it spat back to me this morning when I was practicing. So I would like to also point out it uses B strings, and I was really impressed with that. So, since we are using chat, I am going to clear chat message history between each example. Chat sends in everything. It sends in everything that's in that history each time, and that can cross-contaminate your data. So I also want to show you our logs. So if we look here, or I reconnect, we got the prompts I was sending in. So we are logging what prompts we send, and I can try to make this bigger, but it's Azure. We got IP address, we got prompts, we got the responses. So we know what was asked and what the AI responded with. So, showed off some dev work, now for some QA work. And in QA fashion, I'm going to do it poorly. So I want it to go out to Sauce Demo, which is a very famous website that Sauce Labs put together to practice automation against. So this is a fake web page. It has a little sales thing. It has usernames and passwords here, right? So I want to write automation tests on this. So as an AI language model, it can't do it, but it can write out test case scenarios. And I love these because I can look at these and go, I might not have thought of one of them. Would I have thought about, if it got to it, some of these negative test cases where it's verified the user is not able to proceed to the confirmation page with the error display. I might not have thought of that right away. So it did a good job of that. But I also want to point out, it didn't go to Sauce Demo. It didn't go out on the internet to do this. It's because this is such a well-known website, it already has it in its training data. It knows what saucedemo.com is because it's so well-known and it's been used for years and years. But also, I didn't really want that. I want actual code. I want to automate my stuff. So let's change that a little bit. So full end-to-end tests in Cypress. So let's get some Cypress code here. Well, we're getting Cypress code. The joy of non-deterministic, it forgot to include the code block this time. It happens. But if you look at this Cypress code, it's a lot shorter than those suggestions it gave me on what to test for end-to-end. Once again, it doesn't go out there, it doesn't know. It found reasonable Cypress code in what it's learned, and it generates this based on that, where it's found reasonable lessons on how to do an end-to-end automation test and on Sauce Demo. And so those are two different sets of data it pulled and looked through. So I'm going to jump down here to Docker files. I couldn't generate a Docker file to save my life, frankly. I use them, but this is good enough. Once again, it's a template. I couldn't begin to tell you if this is good or bad, but I can look at this and then tap someone on the shoulder and go, hey, is this doing what I think it's doing? Let's talk through this. And 10 seconds, we have something to start with instead of a blank page. So I'm going to swap to some less code areas. I have a contract here, and it is a rather large contract, but it's an application dependency mapping. And if you see me scrolling to copy all this, so this is a huge prompt. And we are going to make a little bit of change here. So I am going to come in here and I said, advanced options. I'm turning up the temperature. This turns up the creativity of the model. But the person who wrote this prompt really wanted you to show off what it can do in a creative fashion. So we are doing an application dependency mapping using tools. We're going to interview stakeholders, interview owners, and we're going to ask for risks. We are going to ask for a risk title, risk description, and reformatting the risks, and we're going to ask it to generate an 8-week project plan. And if you notice, I put the first prompt in and just sent that. And I'm not even looking at the feedback. Like, that is just priming the AI. Now I'm going to say, hey, for that thing up above, because once again, we're saying in all the chat history, please generate what I'm asking. So here we go. We're going through. We're getting our risks. And we asked it for a format where we could copy and paste into Excel. And we did that. And then it came up with a 8-week plan to go through and do this application dependency mapping. Now, is this a good 8-week plan? You need to look through it. You need to step through it. You can't just copy and paste it. But once again, it might come up with things you didn't think of immediately, even though you do this every day. There's just so much to think about. And it's a good stepping stone. Or, once again, clear message history so we don't contaminate. How about some story writing? So we have Fake Company here, who has the bestest virtual health platform. They want to be able to increase the platform to support therapy. And they want some stories written out of this. Additionally, we have a team in Brazil. So we need to write some of this in Portuguese so they understand it. So we got some personas. We got some stories based on all that. And we got MVP story titles in Portuguese. And if I go over to Google Translate, once again, you need to double check. And Google Translate, we all know, isn't the best, but it's reasonable. It's a good starting point. So once again, I want to point out all that has been logged. We know what people sent in. We know that I just shared Fake Company's Better Virtual Health plan with the AI, but this is all controlled by us, and it's not going out to the public. So, Eric?
Awesome. Thank you, David. So, this is some pretty cool technology that we're building off of. Now, David did an excellent job of going through all of the prompts and the business use cases and showing that our app can largely mimic ChatGPT. However, what is so important is that we are controlling every step of this process. We have an Azure web app that is hosted in Azure with using React and using Python. Fun fact, not all the developers on this project were React or Python engineers, but they could use the technology to help build itself, basically. And the really important part is that these LLM models are being hosted by Azure. We can spin them up, we can delete them, we own the data. This is the part where I should all warn everybody, this is not a production system, so while it's exciting, just know that we're still working on it. And it's not available today. Got ahead of myself a little bit. I didn't mention, though, that these models that are being hosted are actual OpenAI's models. The same exact thing that ChatGPT is running on under the hood, and that's through a partnership that Microsoft has with OpenAI. But our system is designed from the ground up to be plug and play with other models. It's not something that happens completely out of the box, but as new models come out, we can integrate them into our web application, we can test them out, and as long as the models are being hosted responsibly, which we can ensure, it has the same level of security. We control all aspects of this. And as you saw with the auditing, which would be easily ported into Splunk or any other auditing tool, we can add new features on top of this. Auditing is just the first example of that. All right, for our next demo, I'm going to bring Kevin up here, and he is going to run through something that our team has been working on.
Thanks, Eric. Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Gandaho, and I am a software engineer at Worldwide Technology. I've been at the company since 2020, and I'm one of those apprentices that Eric brought on 3 years ago. Fun fact about me, I went skydiving, terrifying experience, never do it again. But that moment that door opened and I saw like the ground, was like, oh man, what did I sign up for? But that same feeling that I had in my gut then is the same feeling I have right now speaking in front of my managers, but I'm gonna get through it just like I got through that dive. So I'm here today to talk to you all about FauxPilot. FauxPilot is an open source alternative to GitHub's Copilot. What these tools offer is a pair programmer in your IDE. What this does is allow you to start coding and have the AI help you complete the code. You can send prompts in your code that will create code for you. You can ask it a question and it'll respond with an answer. GitHub recently did a study where they said that developers who used GitHub's Copilot were 55% faster in completing a task than those who didn't use it. And we'd like to equip our developers, our engineers, with that same tool. But we want to do this in a responsible way by following those guidelines that Eric laid out earlier. And when we started doing our research, we found FauxPilot, and I think this is a good way to do that. So our plan for FauxPilot and what we're actively working on right now is to get FauxPilot hosted in the ATC. We're partnering up with the ATC right now. They have equipped us with a machine that is utilizing NVIDIA's A100 GPUs. This A100 GPU was created specifically for AI and machine learning. Under the hood of FauxPilot is NVIDIA's Triton Inference Server. What this inference server does is allow for a backing model to be used to serve that data, to infer and serve that data. The beauty about this inference server is that it makes it easy for us to switch out the models that is used in FauxPilot or the fork of FauxPilot that we create. Our plan for the future is to create custom models for clients that have learned the repository, that have learned the client's code, so that they understand the code and they will be able to the AI will be able to follow patterns and give examples and utilize code that has been written before. So the way that this would work is that our developers will utilize Visual Studio Code as their IDE. There's a plugin that they will install in Visual Studio Code that will allow them to connect to the ATC securely. So the benefit of this is that it does not leave our servers. It stays where we control the data. And that's the risk of using GitHub's Copilot. GitHub's Copilot we run the risk, or we know that what's going to happen is that data is going to go over to Microsoft servers. We want to keep that at home, and we believe that this is the way of doing it. So right here, I have an example of using a prompt in FauxPilot. So in this example, I ask it to create a function for me that creates a client that can connect to GCP's Spanner database. This is Google's flavor of relational databases. I'd like it to return that client so that I can use in later on in the code. So I get started by just typing in the first word of a function, and there you go. There you see it. It gives me a suggestion of what that code is going to be. Just taking a quick glance at it, it looks okay. I understand that this isn't going to be perfect. I'm going to need to go in and make sure that it works, that I test it, that it's doing what I want it to do. It also can give you multiple suggestions that you can iterate over to make sure that to give you a couple of choices to choose what is best for you. So I tab to accept that code. And right off the bat, you could see that it didn't give me perfect code. This code isn't compiling. That client method looks like something's wrong in that client method. So as a good developer, I'm going to dig in to see what's going on. So I clicked in there to see, all right, what's going on with this method? And right off the bat, you got that help from the IDE that's saying that this requires a second argument, that you need to provide it the name of the database. The cool thing is that FauxPilot understood that there was an issue there too, and it's given me the suggestion to include that database. And I gave it that database name in the prompt. Right here, I'd like to also talk to you about how FauxPilot can use code that you've already wrote to make suggestions for future code. Again, like I said before, we plan on making models that includes the legacy code. But right now in FauxPilot's current version, the way that you would do this is by having the code open in your IDE so that FauxPilot can reference it as you're coding. So I have a simple struct here with a few fields, first name, last name, just some general things that you may find on a customer or in a customer database. So I create a new prompt. This prompt is asking to create a function that will be able to get all of the customers out of the database using that client that I just created above. As you can see, the first line of code looks pretty good. It's a function getting all clients, taking it in context, the client, and returning an array of customers. I tab to accept that piece of code, and then it suggests some more code for me. Just looking at this looks all right. But one thing that I want to point out is that SQL. It's saying select first name, last name, age, address, zip code, state. It got that information from the code that I had in that struct that is open in the IDE. And it's also returning a list, an array of those customers, of those objects that I created before. So I tab to accept it because that's a good starting point. Again, we do not plan for this to be, you just accept the code and go. There's going to be a little bit of testing. There's going to be a little bit of, checking out for bugs, making sure that what you need is, what you got is good. So right off the bat, you could see that there are some issues. I think I need to import the customer struct into this file. And it also seems like there's an issue on line 32 with that query.iter. But this is just a starting point. This is giving me some code to work off of, code to test, code to make sure that, that we need to ensure is quality and good for our customer. But it got us halfway there. Another cool thing that FauxPilot has is a question and answer feature. If you don't feel like going to Google, you don't feel like going to the chat app, right there in your IDE, you can do /Q:, and ask it a question. How do I undo a git commit in terminal? This is something that I've had to ask before. Sometimes fat finger to commit or committed too early, and I needed to change some things out. And it gives me, a command that I can use. So to wrap up, FauxPilot is an alternative to GitHub's Copilot, and we really think that this is going to really help our developers here at WWT. We're partnering with the ATC to use the cutting edge technology and leveraging our relationship with NVIDIA. It allows us to control the models that are used. With that inference server, Triton inference server, we can quickly switch out what is used. We control the data. The data lives in our clients' computers, transferred over the VPN, and lives here in the ATC. And again, we plan on making those client models, client-specific models. And I think this is a really good selling point for our customers. And that's all for me. Thank you.
All right. So as you can see, our team's up to some pretty cool things right now. I am personally extremely excited and proud about what this team has built over the past couple of months. But we're just getting started. Soon, we're going to start working on prompt training for our engineers. Once again, the goal is to enable our workforce to use these tools. Once we can unlock the tools, we need to train people. We need to help them understand the risks. We need to help them get better at prompting. As you saw, some of the stuff that David was putting in was pretty in-depth. We are looking into rapid prototyping using AutoGPT. Some things that we're going to do is continuing to build proof of concepts like you saw today. Once again, everything was a proof of concept. But we're also looking into tailor service offerings. Things that I talked about earlier in the presentation, new work streams that we might not have even thought of before, that are now unlocked. And once we get a good grasp of this, we want to start looking in-house. How can we improve some of our own processes? Some of the things that we use for our business that can leverage generative AI. And now, I think we've got a couple of minutes here where we can take some Q&A. Whether it's from anybody in the room or maybe there's some chat in the WebEx that we can answer a couple of questions. But I thank you all for joining us today, and please feel free to reach out now during the Q&A or at any point in time. I'm always happy to brag on my team and talk about AI. Nick, do we have some questions?
I'm looking right now. The chat is really engaged. I like this a lot.
Maybe we want to start like the FauxPilot stuff you guys demonstrated.
Sure.
Is that available to use for WWT people right now, or is that in the future?
That's a great question. So the question was about FauxPilot. Are we ready to use it yet? And the answer is no, we're not ready to use it. We actually, so Kevin went over our high-level architecture for FauxPilot and pushing the boundaries like we do. We are still trying to get it set up with our partners in the ATC, and we got it far enough that now we've got to get NVIDIA involved and say, hey, how are we going to make this work? But those conversations are happening, which is what's really exciting, and I think we're going to be able to use this technology here pretty soon. Yeah, Fred.
Oh, thanks. So one of your slides mentioned unknown legal ground ahead. Do you have any examples of unanswered legal questions around AI that you think may present a risk or opportunity for WWT?
I love the opportunity part of that question. I wish I had a good answer. So something that we didn't really dive into today is involving copyright law, right? Who owns the copyright or the intellectual property of what gets generated by these models? That concept even gets a little trickier when you're using fine-tuned models. Like if WWT was to create our own model, right? Do we own that copyright? You could say probably, but you could say we probably don't own what comes out of ChatGPT. So that's a space that is rapidly developing. A risk that I see with this that is what prompted me to include auditing in our framework is the intellectual property of the code that we produce for our clients. We hand over the source code, we hand over those repositories, but what happens if a client gets sued for copyright issues about the code that we wrote for them? And how did we use generative AI to make that code for them? Being able to hand over those audit logs, I think, puts us in a really safe position. Not perfect, I'm not a lawyer, but I think it helps us out. Any other questions, Nick?
One question from Doug Thompson. Doug is wondering, how is FauxPilot trained? Is it open source? Is it just Worldwide Technologies code?
That's a great question. So FauxPilot is using Salesforce's code gen models. So those models are intentionally created to be open source. So they are trained on open source code, and the models themselves are released under open source licenses. Now, something cool that we didn't have enough time to talk about today, but that demonstrates the importance of plug and play models and being in control of it, is that Salesforce just released, I believe it's a T5 Plus model last week. Being able to be in control of when that model goes into our systems in the future is important. We're not waiting on GitHub Copilot to integrate the newest and greatest thing, which is very important when you start talking about the open source community versus private models and who's going to win that race. It's still a toss-up. But the open source community around these models is very impressive, and being able to leverage it and control which one we're using is going to be an important ability in the future.
I have a question for you, Eric.
Yeah.
You mentioned that this space represents a great opportunity for Worldwide to be not only an early adopter, if I remember correctly, your one thing to remember, but to be a major player in it. And so there's clearly business implications both on how we sell, how we go to market, but also how our, the purpose of this call, how our engineers leverage tools like this. Mm-hmm. My question for you is, as an engineer who's watching this, who's seeing how this is built, how pairing factors into their day-to-day lives, what feeling would you suggest that they or hope or that they feel at this moment? Is it more fear? Is it more excitement? Where are you seeing this go since you spend so much time reading articles?
Personally, this excites me. This excites me more than anything in my professional career so far, from a technical perspective. These tools are just that. They're not replacing us, at least not yet, and I don't think anytime soon. But we can leverage them to do way more than we've ever been able to do in the past. And so for anyone who is on that fence, which is a completely reasonable question, especially when you're faced with brand new technology, if you're on that fence, I encourage you to look into the technology, to understand it, and start to leverage it yourself. And I think you'll find pretty quickly that there's bumps here and there that need engineers to fix, but it's a new skill. And it's a new skill that we're all going to have to learn, which is why we're going to do some training on it later on this year. But it's not something we should be afraid of. It's something we should be leveraging. Yeah, Nick?
One more question from the chat. Brandon wonders, are we consulting with our own legal counsel or on the legal implications of using this kind of technology?
Yep, and yes. Nick and I actually just had a meeting with lots of representation from our legal team last Monday, 2 Mondays ago, maybe. And this is going to take us a little while to figure out all the kinks, right? So we all understand that, but we are having those conversations. We are actively pushing forward. And that's part of why we are being so clear with the technology that we're using, right? So the early guidance, things that it looks like, is that we're going to have a subset of things possibly approved. We don't know exactly when, but that's the approach we're taking, is let's not ban generative AI completely. We don't want to do that. We also cannot, for all the reasons I mentioned, just let everybody loose with it. So we're having the right amount of rigor, in my opinion, but those conversations are happening. Nothing else? Land the plane? All right. Well, I hope that everybody in this room, that everybody on this call is as excited about this technology as I am. When presenting, I have to be a little bit monotone, but Nick can tell you that late nights or dinner conversations, you have to tell me to be quiet, because otherwise I will just ramble and ramble and ramble. My wife would tell you the same thing. So I'm personally excited, and I hope you are very excited about this as well. We have a lot of work ahead of us. We have a huge opportunity. We're not going to waste it, but we need to be moving forward and pushing towards it. Thank you all for your time. Always feel free to reach out and ask any questions that you have. Thank you.